So take a second and just look around the room you're sitting in right now. I mean, really look at it.
Yeah, pay attention to the actual physical space.
Exactly. Like notice the angle of the ceiling or maybe the harshness of the lighting.
Even the distance between the walls or just the texture of the floor beneath your feet.
Right, because normally we just treat all of that as a passive backdrop.
Yeah.
Like it's just the container we happen to be in.
It's just the stage we're standing on. We don't really think about it.
But what if it's not passive at all? What if that room is actively manipulating your nervous system?
Hacking your stress hormones, basically.
Yeah, filtering your capacity for empathy. And according to this massive new manifesto we are looking at today, literally dictating your potential for violence.
It's a profound paradigm shift when you really internalize that concept.
It really is. And that is the central mission of today's deep dive. We are digging into this fascinating document called The Blueprint of a Peaceful World.
Specifically, we're looking at version 1.0, which is the public academic version.
Right. And the full document is this sprawling, comprehensive behemoth. I mean, it covers everything.
Oh yeah, macro level, global economics, the mechanics of digital democracy, you name it.
But we are doing something highly specific today. We are putting massive blinders on.
Total tunnel vision.
Exactly. We are ignoring the rest of the manifesto entirely to focus exclusively on one single, densely packed paragraph.
Point 37.
Point 37, which is titled The Aesthetics of Peace.
Which is arguably the most radical point in the entire document, honestly.
Why do you say that? Like, what makes it so radical compared to the economic stuff?
Well, because it takes this grand, often nebulous concept of world peace, a concept usually reserved for high-level diplomacy or the UN or complex political treaties.
Right, the stuff you see on the news.
Yeah, exactly. It takes that high-level concept and drags it right down into the literal concrete.
Into the concrete. I love that phrasing.
It reframes peace as a localized sensory experience, one that's determined by the materials, the lighting, and the geometric shapes of the cities we navigate every day.
Because usually when we think about reducing violence in a society, we just immediately jump to legislation.
Or policing.
Right. Policing, the criminal justice system, maybe poverty reduction programs.
Education reform is another big one.
For sure. But this specific paragraph argues that the very shape of the walls around us is dictating our baseline behavior.
It's proposing that world peace isn't just about the words we say to each other or the laws we agree to follow.
It's fundamentally about urban planning. I mean, visual environments and architecture.
Yeah, the authors are presenting this incredible intersection of design, biology, and sociology.
They're treating aesthetics not as a luxury, right?
Yeah.
Not as like a subjective layer of frosting you just slap on a building after the engineering is done.
No, not at all. They are treating it as a fundamental biological tool for human survival and social cohesion.
So I can promise you, by the time we finish unpacking point 37 today, you are never going to look at a concrete office building the exact same way again.
Or a city park. Or even like the background of a futuristic sci-fi movie.
Oh man. Especially the sci-fi movies. It completely rewires your visual processing of the world. So let's jump into the deep end here.
Let's do it.
The very first major concept this paragraph introduces is a term called architectural determinism.
Right. It's a bold, heavy phrase.
It is.
Yeah.
And the text explicitly states, and I'm looking directly at the translation here, it says, an aggressive visual environment increases the risk of violence.
Architectural determinism carries a lot of historical and sociological baggage, for sure.
Well, it's bold, and I kind of have to push back on it immediately. Like, are we really saying an ugly, jagged building literally causes someone to ball up their fists and start a fight?
It sounds a bit extreme when you frame it like that.
Right. It sounds like climbing a pointy chair magically makes you a cartoon villain.
Yeah, a super villain chair.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like if I go home today and paint my bedroom neon orange and just fill it with harsh asymmetrical angles, am I suddenly going to become a more aggressive person?
You're asking if the manifesto is claiming architecture is direct mind control?
Yeah. Is it mind control? Because that feels like a stretch.
Well, the pointy chair doesn't cast a magic spell that turns you into a villain, obviously. But we need to clarify the mechanism the authors are pointing to here.
Okay, lay it out for me.
Because it's far more insidious than immediate, cartoonish mind control. They're talking about systemic risk and baseline allostatic load.
Baseline allostatic load. So we're talking about chronic stress.
Exactly. An aggressive visual environment acts as a constant, unrelenting, low-level stressor on the human endocrine system.
Okay, so instead of a light switch that instantly turns on aggression, it's more like leaving 20 heavy applications running the background of your smartphone.
Oh, that is a phenomenal way to conceptualize it.
Right, like you might not be looking at those apps, the screen looks totally normal, but the battery is draining twice as fast.
And when you finally try to open the camera to take a picture, the whole phone freezes or crashes.
Yes, the architecture is draining our cognitive battery.
Your conscious mind might be completely unaware of the harsh lighting or the brutalist concrete walls you are walking past on your way to work.
You just kind of tune it out.
You consciously ignore it. But your autonomic nervous system is still processing that visual data.
It's still taking it all in.
Right. It takes literal caloric and cognitive energy to filter out an aggressive environment. And over time, that constant background processing drains your cognitive reserves.
So your baseline level of cortisol, which is the primary stress hormone, creeps up.
Your heart rate variability changes. You become physically fatigued faster. Your threshold for frustration just plummets.
So the building didn't cause the fight directly, but it primed the human nervous system for conflict.
Exactly. It created a room full of dry tinder.
So that when a completely normal, everyday spark occurs, a bump shoulder on the sidewalk or a rude comment in a coffee shop,
Or a car cutting you off in traffic.
right, the resulting fire is much more likely to ignite, and it's much more likely to be severe.
That underlying priming is the core of architectural determinism as used in this text.
Wow. Okay, that makes a lot more sense.
To truly understand this, it really helps to look at the history of how we ended up building these aggressive environments in the first place.
Yeah, let's look at the history.
Think about the post-World War II Reconstruction era, particularly the rise of brutalism.
Oh, brutalism. I have strong feelings about brutalism.
Most people do. But the intent behind brutalism, pioneered by architects like Le Corbusier, it wasn't actually malicious.
It wasn't, because those buildings look pretty mean.
It was actually utopian. It was about creating egalitarian functional housing out of raw, concrete beton brute to house millions of people cheaply and efficiently.
But the outcome didn't exactly match the intent, did it?
Not at all.
They built these massive, imposing, raw, concrete structures that completely dwarfed the human scale.
Yeah, you know exactly the kind of buildings I mean.
Massive government plazas, certain university campuses built in the 60s, or those massive monolith parking garages.
You walk past them and you just feel completely insignificant.
You do. You feel like a tiny gear in a massive, uncaring machine.
And insignificance is a very powerful psychological trigger.
How so?
Well, when an environment communicates a lack of care for the individual, when it presents a massive windowless facade of gray concrete that offers nothing to the human eye, it alienates the person occupying that space.
It's basically saying you don't matter.
Exactly. But it goes far beyond just scale and raw materials. Aggressive environments are characterized by a lack of legibility.
Legibility. In a spatial sense, like how easy it is to read the room.
Exactly that. A legible space is one where your brain instantly understands the layout, the exits, the purpose of the area, and what to expect.
Okay, so what is an illegible space?
An aggressive environment is often visually chaotic, lacking a clear hierarchy of information.
Give me an example.
Imagine a dense urban street corner. You're bombarded with flashing LED billboards, mismatched pavement materials, a labyrinth of intersecting crosswalks.
Oh, and sharp architectural corners where you can't easily see what's coming around the bend.
Right. In a space like that, your brain is forced to work overtime just to navigate basic safety.
Because the environment is illegible, you are constantly scanning for threats. You are in a defensive posture the moment you step onto that sidewalk.
Your brain is treating the urban intersection with the exact same hypervigilance it would use if you were walking through a dense jungle filled with predators.
Wow. You are bracing for impact, visually and psychologically.
And if you live your entire life bracing for impact, that chronic exhaustion breeds irritability. It breeds a profound sense of alienation.
And ultimately, as point 37 argues, it drastically increases the statistical risk of violence by chipping away at a population's baseline capacity for empathy.
Exactly. Empathy requires excess energy.
Oh, that's such a good point. If all your cognitive energy is spent just maintaining your equilibrium in a hostile environment, you have nothing left to give to the person next to you.
You're tapped out.
So, if we accept this premise, that aggressive environments actively manufacture systemic stress and prime us for conflict, We have to look at how the document proposes we reverse engineer this.
Because the whole point of the blueprint of a peaceful world is to, engineer peace.
Right. And the text posits that if aggressive architecture creates conflict, then the deliberate creation of what it calls harmonious spaces can actively mitigate social aggression.
The environment can be used as a prophylactic against violence.
Which implies that interior designers, landscape architects, and city planners are actually frontline peace builders.
It really reframes their entire profession.
It does. We usually think of peace builders as diplomats in tailored suits,
Yeah.
sitting around a polished mahogany table in Geneva, arguing over border disputes.
But this text suggests the person who designed the acoustics of that room and the person who decided how the natural light falls across that mahogany table are doing the foundational work.
They are the ones keeping the peace.
And the phrasing they use is highly specific here. They say social aggression.
Social aggression, meaning between people.
Right. They aren't merely advocating for spaces that make individuals feel calm, like designing a nice spa or a personal meditation retreat.
They're talking about managing crowd dynamics.
Yes, they are talking about actively reducing the friction between people who are forced to occupy shared spaces.
Social friction. Okay, let's unpack that. If I'm picturing social friction, my mind immediately goes to public transit.
Public transit is the perfect laboratory for this concept.
Let's build a sensory narrative here to really examine how this works. Picture a crowded underground subway station during the peak of rush hour.
Oh, I can feel my blood pressure rising just thinking about it.
The ceilings are low and oppressive.
The lighting consists of harsh, flickering fluorescent tubes that cast those, sickly shadows everywhere.
And the architectural lines are jagged and asymmetrical.
The materials are hard, reflective tiles and concrete.
Which means the acoustics are an absolute nightmare.
Every screech of metal on metal from the train, every shout of a commuter, every footstep just echoes and amplifies.
It creates this literal wall of cacophony. Now, put 1,000 exhausted people into that concrete box.
The physical friction of the crowd is undeniably high. I mean, people are packed tightly together.
But more importantly, the social friction is pushed to its absolute limit.
Everyone in that space is tense. They've drawn strict, invisible perimeters around themselves.
They become highly protective of their personal space bubbles.
Because the environment feels hostile, the individuals within it view each other as potential threats.
So if someone accidentally steps on your foot in that specific subway station or bumps your shoulder as the train doors open, your immediate autonomic reaction is likely to be defensive anger.
You might posture aggressively, yell, or even escalate into a physical altercation.
The environment has primed the entire crowd for hostility. You already feel like the room itself is attacking your senses.
So the person stepping on your foot just becomes an extension of that hostile architecture. And you snap.
Now let's run the exact same scenario with a crucial variable change.
Okay, let's change the room.
Take those exact same 1,000 people during the exact same stressful rush hour commute and place them in an environment designed according to the aesthetics of peace.
Imagine a gracefully curved, highly legible train terminal.
The ceilings are vaulted, featuring massive skylights that flood the concourse with natural sunlight.
Like the Oculus Transit Hub in New York.
Yes, or some of the meticulously designed stations in Tokyo.
Precisely those kinds of spaces. The architects have implemented acoustic dampening materials, perhaps specialized wood paneling or baffled ceilings.
So the ambient noise is absorbed. It turns a screech into a low, manageable murmur.
The walkways are wide and curving. They gently guide the flow of foot traffic using the psychology of movement.
Rather than forcing thousands of people into sharp, right-angle bottlenecks that cause pedestrian traffic jams.
Exactly. Now, the physical reality hasn't changed. There are still 1,000 people trying to get to work.
The physical friction of the crowd is the exact same.
But the social friction is drastically reduced.
Because in this sunlit, acoustically managed, legible terminal, your baseline cortisol is significantly lower.
The environment is signaling to your brain that you are safe.
So if someone steps on your foot in this space, you actually have the cognitive reserves to process the event rationally.
You are far more likely to assume it was an innocent accident. You are more likely to accept an apology with grace.
The physical space itself has buffered your emotional reaction. The architecture has absorbed the tension rather than amplifying it.
Architecture as a tension shock absorber.
I really love that framework because if we want a peaceful world, We cannot rely solely on everyone just deciding to be on their best behavior all the time.
We're human. We get tired. We get cranky.
Exactly. We need to build shock absorbers directly into the infrastructure of our daily lives.
And this is the moment in point 37 where the manifesto makes a massive critical pivot.
What's the pivot?
Well, it's incredibly easy to make a poetic argument that beautiful things make us feel calm, right? Philosophers have been saying that for millennia.
Sure, beauty equals calm.
But the authors of the blueprint do not stop at poetry or subjective art critique. They anchor this entire aesthetic philosophy in hard, empirical, biological science.
Right. They explicitly base their design mandates on the principles of neuroaesthetics.
Which sounds like a buzzword, honestly.
It totally sounds like a buzzword, but it is actually a deeply rigorous scientific discipline.
It is the vital bridge between the subjective world of art and design and the objective world of neuroscience.
When I was researching this, the realization that hit me the hardest was that our brains possess this ancient, deeply ingrained operating system.
An API for the brain.
Yeah, that directly processes visual inputs, completely bypassing our conscious, rational thought.
We don't wake up in the morning and consciously decide to be stressed out by sharp, jagged lines or flickering fluorescent lights.
Or brutal as concrete. Our neurons just fire that way automatically. It is a biological hardwiring issue, not a preference issue.
Neuroaesthetics is a relatively new field, but it has completely revolutionized how we understand human interaction with the environment.
How do they even study it? Like, what are the tools?
Researchers use advanced brain imaging technology like functional MRI machines, EEG scans, to map exactly how our brains react to beauty.
That is wild.
They can watch the visual cortex process information, observe the amygdala searching for threats, and see the reward centers, like the nucleus accumbens, just light up.
When a subject looks at different geometric shapes, spatial layouts, or color palettes.
Exactly. They're literally looking at the physical footprint of beauty inside the human brain.
And by invoking neuroaesthetics, the manifesto effectively proves that the aesthetics of peace is not merely a matter of subjective taste.
It's not a debate where one person says, I prefer blue, and another says, I prefer red, and both are equally valid.
It elevates environmental design from an argument over style to a matter of public health and biological reality.
Which completely changes the stakes.
Oh, 100%. If a city planner designs a public square that is ugly, chaotic, and aggressive, and we treat it as just a matter of poor taste, we might complain about it, but we tolerate it.
But if that design is objectively, biologically causing stress and raising the potential for violence, well, ignoring the principles of neuroaesthetics is essentially a form of systemic negligence.
To understand why certain shapes and spaces trigger these biological responses, we really have to look through the lens of evolutionary psychology.
Because our human brains did not evolve to navigate gridiron streets, concrete canyons, or glass skyscrapers.
No, for hundreds of thousands of years, the human nervous system developed in the wild, natural world.
Our brains evolved to recognize specific visual patterns as reliable indicators of safety and other patterns as distinct indicators of mortal danger.
So let's break that down. What does an ancient hunter-gatherer brain consider a safe pattern?
Evolutionary biologists often refer to the savanna hypothesis and prospect refuge theory.
Prospect refuge. Okay, what does that mean?
Think about what an early human needs to survive. They need clear sight lines, the prospect, so they can spot predators or prey from a long distance.
Right, you need to see what's coming.
But they also need a safe place to hide. The refuge, like the canopy of a tree or an elevated cave.
So a safe environment is one where you can see without being seen?
Yes. Furthermore, the brain looks for the presence of water, because water guarantees survival.
Makes sense.
It looks for symmetrical, organized, organic forms, like the shape of a healthy fruiting tree or the predictable rolling rhythm of a natural landscape.
And when our ancient ancestors encountered those visual cues, what happened biologically?
Their brains released a cascade of neurochemicals, serotonin, dopamine, that effectively told the nervous system, you're safe here, you can lower your guard, you can rest, eat, and socialize.
And on the flip side, what are the visual cues for danger?
Dangerous environments in nature are visually chaotic and unpredictable.
Imagine a dense, tangled thicket or a dark, overgrown forest where a predator could be camouflaged just 3 feet away.
Think of unnatural, jagged, broken landscapes, sharp cliffs, shattered rocks. That might indicate a recent landslide, an earthquake, or just treacherous terrain.
These are environments that lack legibility. You cannot see a clear path of escape.
So when the eye takes in that visual chaos, The visual cortex struggles to process the chaotic information.
It forces the eyes to make rapid, erratic movements. What are those called again?
Saccades. And this processing difficulty sends an immediate signal to the amygdala, the brain's fear and threat detection center.
The amygdala sounds the alarm, flooding the bloodstream with cortisol and adrenaline. It prepares the body for fight or flight. Stay alert. Danger is imminent.
This is the terrifying part of the deep dive, really.
What you were saying is that modern architecture, often completely by accident in the pursuit of cheap construction or avant-garde design, actively triggers those ancient biological danger signals.
In many cases, yes.
Wow.
When a developer builds a claustrophobic city block with towering windowless walls, chaotic neon signage, harsh right angles, and no clear lines of sight.
They are unwittingly recreating the exact visual signature of a dangerous, predator-filled thicket.
Your rational, conscious mind knows you're perfectly safe. You know you were just walking down the street to buy a coffee and a bagel.
But your ancient brain, processing the geometry of the buildings, is screaming, "We are trapped in a canyon. We are in danger. Be ready to fight."
And a population trapped in a chronic state of fight or flight is the exact antithesis of a peaceful society.
Peace requires a nervous system that feels secure enough to engage in complex, vulnerable, empathetic social behaviors.
You simply cannot build a lasting, peaceful world out of citizens whose architecture biologically convinces them they are under constant ambient threat.
So this brings us to a massive logistical hurdle.
A huge one.
If our brains are biologically hardwired to demand these specific ancient patterns of safety, these natural evolved cues, how do we possibly implement that in a modern, hyperdense metropolis?
It's a daunting challenge.
Because the solution can't be that we bulldoze Manhattan and move 8 million people back to the savannah.
Right, we have to move forward.
And the Manifesto provides a specific methodology for this, right?
It does, and it uses a term that has been gaining incredible traction in progressive architecture circles. 37 points directly to biophilic design as the practical structural tool for achieving the harmonious spaces required for peace.
Biophilic design. Biophilia literally translates to love of life or love of nature.
Correct.
I've seen this term used, but I want to make sure we define the depth of it. Because my initial thought when someone says, bring nature indoors, is that a corporate office buys a few potted ficus trees.
Sticks them in the corners of a gray cubicle farm.
Right. Maybe paints one wall green and calls it biophilic design. Is that what we were talking about?
That is what we call greenwashing.
Greenwashing. Yeah, that makes sense.
A potted plant in a cubicle is a pleasant gesture, but it is entirely superficial. Biophilic design, as mandated by the blueprint of a peaceful world, is a deeply structural, foundational approach to creating habitats.
It is not about surface decoration. It is about rewriting the fundamental DNA of the space to align with human biology.
So it isn't just the frosting on the cake, it's changing the entire recipe for the cake.
A perfect analogy. True biophilic design addresses the neuroaesthetic needs we just discussed by structurally mimicking the environments we evolved to thrive in.
It relies heavily on natural lighting, but not just a single window.
It means designing buildings that utilize dynamic daylighting light that changes in intensity and color temperature throughout the day.
Aligning with our natural circadian rhythms rather than blasting us with static artificial glare for 14 hours straight.
I read that it also heavily prioritizes natural ventilation.
Yes, allowing people to feel subtle shifts in air temperature, feeling a breeze, smelling the outside air.
It helps situate the human body in time and space, preventing that feeling of being trapped in a hermetically sealed casino where you lose all track of reality.
Absolutely. And crucially, it dictates the physical shapes of the buildings and interior spaces. Nature very rarely builds in perfect, sharp 90-degree angles.
A forest is not a grid.
Nature builds in sweeping curves, in complex fractals, in flowing organic lines.
Let's talk about fractals, because that blew my mind when I looked into it.
It's fascinating science.
A fractal is a complex pattern where each part has the same statistical character as the whole, like a snowflake, or the branches of a tree, or the jagged edge of a coastline.
And neuroaesthetics has proven that the human visual cortex processes natural fractal patterns with incredible ease. We call it processing fluency.
When you look at the branches of a tree, your brain parses that complex geometry effortlessly.
It actually induces a measurable state of relaxed wakefulness.
Biophilic architecture actively incorporates these fractal patterns into its design. perhaps in the layout of the structural supports, the pattern of the windows, or the design of the atrium.
To give the brain that same sense of effortless processing.
It extends to the literal materials we touch, too. Think about the psychological difference between running your hand along a cold, sterile steel handrail versus a smooth, polished wooden handrail.
Utilizing natural tactile materials is paramount. Wood, stone, bamboo, natural fibers.
These materials possess visual and tactile complexities, the unique grain of a piece of timber, the porous texture of natural stone.
Complexities that our brains find endlessly engaging but never exhausting.
It is the fundamental difference between staring at a blank white drywall and staring into a gently flickering campfire.
The blank wall provides zero information, which is actually unnerving to the brain. The fire provides highly complex but soothing, rhythmic information.
I want to ground this in reality for the listener, because we aren't just theorizing here. The results of biophilic design are highly documented and scientifically measurable.
They absolutely are.
Let's look at the medical field, because the data there is astonishing.
The medical data is the most compelling proof of concept we have. We can look directly at the foundational study in this field, conducted by Dr. Roger Ulrich in 1984.
Right, the Pennsylvania hospital study.
He examined patients recovering from identical gallbladder surgeries in a hospital. Half the patients were placed in rooms with windows looking out at a brick wall.
The other half were in rooms with windows looking out at a small stand of deciduous trees.
The only variable was the view from the bed. A brick wall versus a tree.
And the results were staggering, right?
Right. The patients with the view of nature recovered significantly faster. They spent fewer days in the hospital.
They required drastically less potent pain medication.
And the nurses recorded far fewer negative behavioral evaluations, meaning the patients were less anxious, less depressed, and less agitated.
Just from looking at a tree, the architecture of the room literally acted as a medical intervention.
Because the biophilic environment allowed their autonomic nervous systems to stand down.
Their bodies were no longer wasting precious energy fighting the stress of a sterile, hostile clinical environment.
They could divert all that biological energy into the physical healing process.
And we see the exact same metrics in biophilic workplaces. Offices designed with abundant daylight, organic layouts, and integrated plant life show dramatically lower rates of employee absenteeism.
Productivity surges. Self-reported stress levels plummet. The architecture literally lowers the resting heart rates of the people working inside it.
So to tie this directly back to the manifesto, if biophilic design lowers baseline stress, speeds up physical healing, and reduces anxiety, it perfectly validates the claim that it serves as a mechanism to reduce social aggression.
Exactly. If an entire city is built using these principles, if millions of people are walking around with lower heart rates, better circadian sleep cycles, and a subconscious feeling of safety, the entire baseline temperature of that society drops.
The dry tinder is removed.
It is a massive structural public health intervention disguised as urban planning.
But this raises a profound, almost existential question for me.
Go ahead.
If the definitive answer to our modern stress epidemic is to mimic nature, and to rely so heavily on these ancient, evolved biological cues, does that imply we have to abandon technological progress?
I see where you're going with this.
Because if we follow this logic to its absolute extreme, are the authors suggesting we need to dismantle our modern power grid, abandon our cities, and go back to living in wooden huts in the forest to achieve world peace?
That feels like a massive regression,
So
right?
it feels like giving up on the future entirely.
Well, that is a very common and very understandable fear when people first encounter the concept of deep biophilic integration. There is this pervasive cultural assumption that harmony with nature strictly requires a regression of human technology.
Right. It's either tech or trees. You can't have both.
But the blueprint of a peaceful world explicitly, adamantly rejects that notion. In fact, Point 37 culminates in a striking, highly specific vision of the future that dictates the exact opposite.
Yes. The paragraph ends by mandating the adoption of solarpunk aesthetics.
Solarpunk?
And I have to admit, as a huge sci-fi nerd, I completely geek out over this inclusion.
It's a fascinating aesthetic movement.
For any listener who hasn't encountered the term before, solarpunk is a relatively new, incredibly vibrant genre of art, literature, and architectural theory.
How would you conceptualize solarpunk for someone whose vision of the future is solely defined by mainstream cinema?
The most effective way to understand solarpunk is to look at its direct opposite, which is cyberpunk.
Ah, cyberpunk.
We all know cyberpunk is the default aesthetic for almost every dystopian sci-fi movie of the last 40 years.
Think Blade Runner or Altered Carbon.
It features neon lights slicing through eternal polluted rain, massive monolithic skyscrapers owned by omnipotent megacorporations.
Flying cars, cybernetic implants, advanced AI.
But despite all that incredible technology, the average person is utterly miserable, impoverished, and deeply alienated.
Cyberpunk is commonly defined by the phrase high-tech lowlife.
Yeah, that sums it up perfectly.
It envisions a future where human technology has completely conquered and paved over nature, but in the process, it crushed the human spirit.
It is a world built entirely on the friction of hypercapitalism and the ruthless extraction of resources.
Exactly. And Solarpunk is the deliberate, optimistic antithesis of that dystopia.
The Manifesto defines solarpunk as a vision of the future, where the highest levels of human technology work in deep, intentional symbiosis with the natural world.
It is bright, it is sunlit, and it is fiercely optimistic.
If we connect solarpunk back to the core concept of the aesthetics of peace, it serves as the ultimate visual representation of a species that has finally reached maturity.
It is what a human civilization looks like after it has successfully solved its violent internal conflicts.
And crucially, after it has solved its extractive conflict with the planet itself.
It doesn't reject technology in favor of primitivism. It elevates technology to its highest moral purpose.
Precisely. Solarpunk utilizes the absolute bleeding edge of scientific advancement. We're talking about advanced material sciences, hyper-efficient AI-driven resource management.
And clean, limitless energy grids powered by advanced solar, wind, and geothermal tech.
But instead of using that technology as a blunt instrument to dominate the Earth, Solarpunk weaves that technology seamlessly into the biosphere.
Technology becomes a delicate tool used to nurture and enhance the natural world.
Let's paint a vivid picture of what a solarpunk city actually looks like for the listener, because it is such a powerful image to hold in your mind.
Okay, set the scene.
Imagine looking out over a massive urban skyline. But instead of sheer cliffs of glass and steel reflecting blinding heat back into the streets, you see skyscrapers that are breathing.
The buildings are covered from top to bottom in vertical forests and cascading terraced gardens.
The architecture is biologically active. Those buildings are serving as massive carbon sinks, filtering the air for the city, while simultaneously providing vital habitats for local avian and insect wildlife.
And the buildings are generating their own power through next-generation transparent solar panels integrated directly into the windows.
And think about the street level. Instead of massive multi-lane highways choked with the noise and pollution of combustion engines, the infrastructure has been entirely reclaimed.
You have solar-powered public transit, perhaps sleek, utterly silent magnetic levitation trains, or automated electric trams gliding effortlessly through expansive, pedestrian-friendly green zones.
The streets are transformed into community gardens, broad walking paths lined with fruit trees, and open public plazas designed for social connection.
The aesthetics of this world, the literal visual language of it, incorporate every single biophilic design principle we discussed.
The technology is beautiful. Wind turbines aren't just utilitarian metal poles. They are designed as kinetic public sculptures.
Solar arrays are designed using biomimicry, perhaps mimicking the fractal canopy of a forest, or integrated into stunning public art installations.
It is a future that firmly rejects the false dichotomy that technology and nature must be enemies locked in a zero-sum game.
They are partners in a symbiotic relationship.
This represents a profound, necessary shift in our cultural narrative. For decades, our collective imagination of the future has been entirely monopolized by dystopia and apocalypse.
We have been culturally conditioned to assume that technological advancement inevitably leads to ecological collapse and social isolation.
Then that assumption becomes a dangerous, self-fulfilling prophecy.
Exactly. If architects, engineers, and city planners only dream of cyberpunk dystopias, that is the world they will subconsciously build. We steer toward what we visualize.
By explicitly mandating the aesthetics of solarpunk, the blueprint of a peaceful world intervenes in that dark narrative.
By actively visualizing a vibrant, optimistic future where technology and nature coexist peacefully, the Manifesto creates a literal blueprint for building it.
It provides a destination that is actually worth striving for, rather than just a disaster we are desperately trying to avoid.
It is the psychological difference between running away in terror from a monster and running joyfully toward a paradise.
One motivation is driven entirely by fear, cortisol, and survival instincts.
The other is driven by hope, creativity, and aspiration.
The authors of this document are clearly stating that hope is a vastly more effective, sustainable engineering principle for the long-term survival of our species.
When you step back and look at the entire journey we just took through point 37, the logical progression is absolutely breathtaking.
Let's synthesize all those moving parts to see the complete architecture of their argument.
It really is a masterclass in structural thinking.
Walk us through the through line.
First, they establish the problem through architectural determinism. They reveal the invisible toxin in our daily lives, proving that the aggressive, chaotic, illegible environments we've built over the last century are actively increasing our baseline stress.
Degrading our empathy and manufacturing the potential for societal violence.
The realization that the harsh walls and chaotic streets are actively working against us.
Second, they validate the problem using the hard science of neuroaesthetics.
They prove that this isn't just subjective complaining by architecture critics, it is an inescapable biological reality.
Our ancient evolved brains are fundamentally incompatible with hostile modern geometry. We are hardwired to require the visual cues of nature to feel safe.
The biological imperative of the human brain crying out for its natural habitat.
Third, they provide the practical, structural methodology to fix the problem through biophilic design.
They demonstrate exactly how to integrate those necessary ancient patterns of safety dynamic light, fractal geometry, organic forms, tactile materials into our modern buildings.
Effectively transforming our architecture from a chronic stressor into an active healing mechanism.
Architecture functioning as preventative public health medicine.
And finally, they provide the ultimate unifying vision through Solarpunk.
They offer a cohesive, inspiring image of what a fully realized, peaceful, highly advanced human civilization looks like when it applies these biophilic tools at scale.
They prove that we do not have to sacrifice our technological future to save our ancient biology. We can beautifully, seamlessly integrate the two.
All of that staggering insight packed into one single paragraph of a much larger manifesto.
It is a testament to the profound depth of the blueprint of a peaceful world. It recognizes a fundamental truth that most political documents miss.
True peace must be holistic.
You cannot simply sign a peace treaty, declare an end to violence, and expect society to flourish while people are still forced to live and work in environments that biologically traumatize them every single day.
The physical environment must reflect, support, and actively generate the goal of peace.
It redefines peace from a political state of being into an environmental constant.
It has been an incredible intellectual journey today.
And for you, listening to this, I truly hope this deep dive has provided you with a completely new lens through which to view your reality.
You now possess what I consider to be the ultimate takeaway for anyone who loves learning and exploring ideas.
You have gained the ability to read the psychology of the spaces you inhabit.
You are no longer just walking passively through a city or an office building. You are now reading its source code.
Exactly. You can walk into a public plaza, look at the brutalist concrete and the lack of seating, and realize this space was explicitly designed to make me feel small, isolated, and unwelcome.
Or you can walk into a beautifully lit, curved atrium filled with plant life and recognize this space was engineered to lower my heart rate and foster social connection.
And once you possess the vocabulary to read that environmental code, you cease to be a passive victim of your surroundings.
You regain your agency.
You can start making highly informed choices about where you choose to spend your time, how you actively design your own personal and professional spaces, and what kind of structural architecture you demand from the planners in your community.
Which brings us right back to the exact exercise we started with.
Now that you fully understand that your physical environment is quietly, constantly programming your stress hormones, your capacity for empathy, and your potential for conflict, take one more look at the space you are sitting in right now.
Really examine it through the lens of neuroaesthetics.
Is your immediate environment waging a silent, exhausting war on your nervous system? Or is it deliberately designed for peace?
And more importantly, and this is the thought I want you to mull over after you finish listening today, what is one specific thing you can move, change, or introduce to your space right now to start engineering your own personal aesthetics of peace?